It was a hot, late afternoon when I walked onto the shooting range, my boots crunching on the gravel beneath me. The scent of gunpowder hung in the air, a familiar tang that reminded me of my training back in the military. I had always loved shooting. There was something about the precision, the focus it required, and the satisfaction of hitting the target that calmed my mind. I didn't expect to be the center of attention that day. But when I stepped up to the line, I felt the eyes of the others, 2 older men and a younger woman, on me, their eyes scanning me like I was an anomaly. I adjusted my grip on the rifle, trying to block them out. Their laughter cut through the air as one of the men, wearing a beige utility vest, nudged his buddy in a mock gesture. "Hope you know what you're doing," he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. I didn't respond. I simply took a deep breath, focused on the target ahead, and squeezed the trigger. The first shot rang out, clean and steady. The second one followed, then the third. I couldn't help but notice how their conversation had slowed, the mocking smiles fading from their faces. The shots were all near the center of the target, my form steady as I aimed. With each pull of the trigger, their laughter dimmed. By shot number 5, I could feel their attention shift from casual amusement to something more calculated. There was a shift in the air, a tangible tension as they watched me with rapt focus. The sounds of the range seemed to fade into the background, and all I could hear was the rhythmic pounding of my heartbeat in my ears. Shot after shot, the target showed no mercy, each round landed almost exactly where I wanted it to. By the time I reached shot number 7, the mocking whispers had completely stopped. The older man in the beige vest had his arms crossed, a tight frown forming on his face. The younger woman, who had been talking loudly with her friend, was now silent, watching my every move with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. I wasn't sure if they were impressed or just frustrated. It didn't matter. The only thing I cared about was the bullseye I was aiming for, the only thing that mattered was making it count. One of the men, the one in the navy vest, had stopped talking entirely. He leaned forward on the bench, his eyes narrowing as he studied the shots. I could see the tension in his jaw, the competitive spark lighting up in his eyes. I wasn't about to let that get to me. I locked my gaze onto the target, lined up the sights, and pulled the trigger again. Bang! Another perfect shot. Their silence was deafening. The younger woman was now shifting uncomfortably on her feet, glancing between the target and her friends. She muttered something under her breath, though I couldn't hear it over the roar of my next shot. At this point, I could feel them watching me, but I didn't let it distract me. All that mattered now was finishing what I started. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for the final rounds. I could feel the sweat beading at the back of my neck, but it wasn't from the heat of the sun, it was the heat of the tension building around me. The once dismissive laughter had faded, and in its place was a thick, almost palpable silence. The only sounds now were the sharp cracks of my rifle as I sent rounds downrange. Shot number 8. Another perfect hit, dead center. The target was nearly covered in holes by now, but the shape of the bullseye was still clearly visible, each shot had only enhanced it, making my accuracy undeniable. I glanced over at the trio, the weight of their stares now completely undeniable. The man in the beige vest was staring straight at me, his mouth slightly agape. The woman was adjusting her cap nervously, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. I could see the frustration creeping in. They hadn't expected this. I wasn't going to stop now. I pulled the trigger again. Bang! The shot rang out, and as I watched the bullet strike the target, I felt the weight of every moment I'd worked for, the hours of training, the focus, the resilience. They were all building toward this moment. Shot number 9 was perfect, the hole near the heart of the bullseye. But I wasn't done yet. I could sense them now, all of them, on the edge of their seats, waiting. The last shot would either break them or put an end to their little game. I took a deep breath and steadied my hand. The rifle felt heavier now, as though the weight of their expectations was pressing down on me. But I knew what I had to do. The final shot. The last shot was everything. I adjusted my stance, focusing all my energy into aligning my aim. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for me to either prove them wrong or let them have their victory. I didn't let the pressure get to me. The rifle felt like an extension of my body as I lined up the sights one last time, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. The moment felt suspended in time, the air thick with anticipation. Then, without hesitation, I squeezed the trigger. Bang! The shot echoed across the range, and I knew, even before I saw the result, that it was a good one. The recoil of the rifle vibrated through me, but I held steady, watching as the bullet flew. The target? Perfect. The hole in the target was right at the center, the shot an undeniable bullseye. I felt a rush of satisfaction flood through me, but there was no time to bask in it. I turned to face the three of them. The older man in the beige vest was the first to speak, though his voice was tight. I didn't think you had it in you. The woman, clearly shaken, could only manage a nervous laugh, her gaze flicking between the target and me. She was trying to save face, but it was obvious. The confidence they had when they first saw me had evaporated, replaced by something closer to disbelief. And the younger man in the navy vest? He had no words left. His face was frozen, his mouth slightly agape, as he stared at the target, as though it had somehow betrayed him. For a brief moment, I stood there, feeling a quiet sense of triumph. The challenge wasn't just about proving them wrong, it was about proving to myself that I could rise above their doubts. And in that moment, it felt like I had done just that. They could never have imagined the outcome. The silence that followed felt strange, like the air had been sucked out of the shooting range. The three of them stood frozen for a few seconds, as though processing what had just happened. I could see their expressions shifting, from smug amusement to shock, to something more like respect. The older man in the beige vest took a long, slow breath and finally broke the silence. "Well. Looks like you earned it," he said, his tone softer than before, though still carrying the faintest hint of disbelief. "You really know your stuff." I nodded, but didn't say anything. There was no need to respond. The shots had spoken for themselves. The younger man in the navy vest, still looking slightly rattled, glanced over at the woman beside him. They exchanged a quick, uncomfortable look, and she offered a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Impressive," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't the kind of praise I was looking for, but I could tell it was genuine. They hadn't expected me to hit every mark with such precision. They hadn't thought I could stand toe-to-toe with them, let alone outshoot them. The final nail in their pride came when the woman stepped up to the line. I could see the tension in her posture, the way her shoulders were tight as she set her stance. She wasn't used to losing, and I could feel her resolve shaking. She fired off a shot. It missed. I watched as she took another, trying to regain some form of control. Her second shot was better, but still off-center. The man in the beige vest, usually the one to crack a joke or comment, was now unusually quiet. He placed his hand on the shoulder of the younger man in the navy vest, a silent gesture of consolation. They couldn't hide the fact that they were rattled. The confidence they had displayed before had slipped away, replaced with the uncomfortable awareness that they had misjudged me. I packed up my things, feeling a quiet satisfaction settle over me. No words needed to be spoken, I had already made my point. I wasn't here to prove anything to them. I was here to show that I could hold my own, no matter the circumstance. And when I walked away from the range that day, I knew one thing for certain, their opinion of me had changed. And for once, it felt good to have the last word without saying a single thing. As I walked toward the exit, I could feel their eyes on my back, but this time, there was no judgment, no sneers. Just silence. It wasn't the silence of arrogance or superiority, it was something else. It was the kind of silence you get when someone has just been knocked off their high horse, left to rethink everything they assumed. The sun was lower in the sky now, casting long shadows across the shooting range as I loaded my gear into the trunk of my car. The hum of the vehicles in the parking lot, the distant chatter of other shooters, it all felt distant now. My mind was calm, centered, but not because I had just outshot them. It was because I had proven something to myself. I didn't need their approval, their acknowledgement, or even their respect. I had my own. But as I closed the trunk, I couldn't help but glance back at the range. The three of them were still standing there, lingering by the firing line. The man in the beige vest finally broke the silence, his voice reaching me from across the lot. "You know," he said, "you made us rethink how we look at things. Maybe we judged too quickly." I paused, turning slightly but not fully facing them. His words were sincere, but I didn't need to hear any more. Their admission was enough. They understood now, and they would carry that lesson with them. That was all that mattered. I nodded, keeping my gaze steady, and then turned to leave. Sometimes, it wasn't about proving a point to others. Sometimes, the real victory is in proving it to yourself, and knowing that, in the end, you stand on your own. And as I drove away, the faint sound of their voices behind me faded into the distance, leaving nothing but the quiet hum of the road ahead. A few days passed after the shooting range incident. I didn't think much of it, just another day, another victory under my belt. But the world has a funny way of making things come full circle when you least expect it. I was at a local cafe, sitting by the window and sipping my coffee, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Hey, you're the woman from the range, right?" I turned around slowly, half expecting to see someone who might have just remembered me from that day. And sure enough, standing behind me was the man in the beige vest. He was looking a little sheepish, his hands awkwardly stuffed into his jacket pockets. He was alone this time, no friends to back him up. "I didn't think I'd run into you here," he continued, his smile not quite as confident as it had been on the range. Well, I wanted to apologize for how we acted that day." I raised an eyebrow. "Apologize?" He nodded, a genuine expression of regret on his face. "Yeah. You know, we came in thinking you were just some, well, you know. But after watching you shoot, I realized how wrong we were. I wasn't sure what to say." I had no need for an apology, my victory had already been sealed, and their opinions no longer mattered. But it was hard to ignore the sincerity in his voice. "I get it," he said. "I guess we all have our biases, but you made me rethink things. You didn't just hit your shots, you taught me a lesson. And that, well, that counts for more than any competition." I paused, letting his words settle. It wasn't about winning anymore, it was about the change in perspective. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, he was acknowledging that his judgment had been flawed, and for some reason, that was enough. "You're welcome," I replied simply, offering a small smile. He seemed to hesitate before asking, "Would you maybe want to join us for a drink sometime? We could talk more about, well, everything. No pressure. Just two people having a conversation." I considered the offer for a moment, but then shook my head. I appreciated the gesture, but I didn't need their validation anymore. I had moved past that. "Thanks, but I'm good," I said, standing up and grabbing my bag. "Take care." And with that, I left the cafe, feeling a little lighter. The conversation had been short, but it had served its purpose. They had learned something, and now I could move on, knowing that I had made an impact, even without needing to prove anything further. Weeks passed, and life returned to its usual rhythm. The shooting range incident, though impactful, became a distant memory, until one morning, I received a message that caught me off guard. It was from the woman in the group, the one who had been so quiet during the range. Her message was brief but clear: "I've been thinking a lot about that day at the range. You showed us more than how to hit a target. You showed us strength and confidence. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how we treated you. You deserve a lot more respect than we gave you." I read it twice, the weight of her words sinking in. I wasn't expecting any more apologies, certainly not from her. But her message struck a chord, she wasn't just apologizing for her actions, she was recognizing something deeper, a lesson she had learned. I thought about how they had looked at me that day, how they had sized me up, underestimated me, and assumed they had the advantage. Yet, I had turned that assumption on its head, not with confrontation but with silent, unyielding confidence. A small part of me was tempted to reply, to send a simple acknowledgement. But I realized I didn't need to. My actions had already done the talking, and they knew that. Instead, I left the message unread for a while. I wasn't bitter or angry, far from it. I simply felt that, in the end, I had done what I needed to do. I didn't need to keep rehashing the past. It was over, and I had grown from it. A few days later, I ran into the older man in the beige vest again. This time, there was no surprise, no awkwardness. We exchanged a nod, a mutual understanding passed between us without a word spoken. "You're still hitting those targets?" he asked with a knowing grin. I smiled back. "Every day." And just like that, our paths crossed once more, but this time, there was no judgment, no challenge. Just two people who had shared a moment and walked away changed by it. As I walked away from the encounter, I realized that the real victory wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about proving something to myself, that strength, confidence, and self-respect could turn the tables in the most unexpected of ways. And that's when I knew I'd won.